I don't know how to describe it except to say that fortunately we've become very close friends. And in all those years, you know, over 20 years now, I've never spent 30 seconds that were dull.
I was doing my first screen test ever, and Billy Wilder was the director. It was 7 Year Itch, the part eventually played by Tom Ewell with Marilyn Monroe. And I was a very argumentative stage actor. And I argued a great deal with Billy. I kept telling him that I felt rushed. It was awful, and it was a terrible experience. And then I saw the Rushes 2 days later, and it was perfect.
I'll tell you one story about Billy, which I think is typical. About 4 months after we finished the apartment, we were having dinner one night, and sitting at the bar, waiting for our table, Billy said, "Now I know how we should have done the picture." He said, "We should have given Lemon some sort of infirmity, a clubfoot or something, and then he would have been a much more sympathetic character." And I said, "Nonsense. Then he becomes a voyeur, and the whole thing becomes much dirtier." But now by this time the picture is in release, it's a big success, but Billy's still rewriting it in his head and redirecting it a little too.
He's exciting. I think that's maybe one of the greatest qualities about him as a picture maker and as a director. He's so exciting to be with. He gets you up. I don't care what kind of a mood you may be in. Boom.
And many hard issues to be settled. The questions that have brought warfare and bitterness to the Middle East for the last 30 years will not be settled overnight.
I thought a Hollywood director would have a bigger office. Isn't it too small for you?
Well, it's small, but it's gemütlich, as we say. But I do have another room there. Go and look. It's for my secretary. That is, if I can get rid of all that crap there. Hello. Yes, Walter. La meilleure chose. Excuse me, please. It's Mr. Walter Matthau. He tries to tell me in French what he's going to do, and it's going to may take a long time. Continuez, Monsieur Matthau. Very good. That was Walter Matthau. He just made the bed. Are we still running there?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
What is this bird cage up there?
Well, it's kind of symbolic gesture of my final freedom from the imprisonment in studios, as it were. It's the bird that has escaped the cage, has escaped the Universal Warner's Columbia neighborhood, which I call the Bermuda Triangle. What is your next question?
You were born in Austria, near Vienna, at the beginning of this century?
That's correct, yes. Now, in order to kind of familiarize you with where I come from, you must, because I was born in 1906, and you must think in terms of Austria in those days. It was a huge monarchy of 56 million people, Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Czechoslovakia, parts of Poland, Yugoslavia. And my father, by profession, was an owner of hotels, railroad restaurants, coffee houses, spread through the entire old monarchy, which collapsed in 1918, as we know. And I was born in a small town. I was brought as a kid of 2.5 years old to Vienna. I went there to grammar school, then to high school, what you would call lycée. And the great endeavor of my father was, when you have two sons, one will become a lawyer, the other one will become a doctor. Well, I had a brother. Neither did he become a doctor, nor did I become a lawyer. I became a newspaperman.
Let's do another flashback, further back in time. How was the atmosphere in Vienna? Because it must have been a shock for you to this crumbling empire. I mean, do you have memories of Franz Joseph and
Absolutely. I remember vividly the time during World War I. I was a little boy, but I, like everybody else, I would have to stand in line for sometimes 16, 18, 24 hours just for a couple of potatoes. You know, there was nothing to eat. It was sort of the end of the line. I remember vividly the revolution. I remember the decline of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And I also remember, to go back in time, I remember the Emperor Francis Joseph. I remember vividly a kind of an interesting moment. Emperor Francis Joseph died in 1916. And it was an enormous parade of the heads of other royal houses. A fantastic kind of show. I wish I could direct the thing with that many extras, that many black horses. And there was, in that black thing that was moving slowly down the streets of Vienna, there was a little white, a little boy in white. It was a Hungarian uniform of a 100 hussar with a white feather there. And that was Crown Prince Otto. And I envied that boy, my God. He one day will become the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Of course, 2 years later, the whole thing was over and finished. And I remember years later, when I was working at Paramount, somebody came up and said, look, we have a visitor here. It was lunchtime, commissary kind of restaurant. And he is a countryman of yours, and would you like to meet him? And I said, who is it? And they said, that's Crown Prince Otto, this same very man, you know. And I said, sure. So I went to see him, and he was sort of, by this time, a middle-aged man, getting bald. He was here giving lectures at universities. And and there I said, that was my dream come true. I finally met the Crown Prince, but he was a Crown Prince no more.
What kind of journalism were you doing? What type of topics were you covering?
I was covering everything, to tell you the truth. I was doing sports, which was mostly football in those days. I was also doing some reportage of a criminal nature. I would do the dirty work. My job would be, for instance, to go to the parents of somebody who was a murderer, who had committed a murder, to ask for a photograph, or to somebody whose family had died in a fire, to ask. A very, very embarrassing thing for me.
Did you meet famous people during your interviews?
Yes, I remember one day for the Christmas issue, they always had an enquete, one question which they put up to many famous people. And I had to cover some of those. The question then was, and I remember it vividly, was about a new philosophy of politics, something called fascism. And it was a question about Mussolini, and what does one think about Mussolini? And I was sent within one day. Here are the people that I covered in one day. They were Richard Strauss, they were Schnitzler, Freud, and Adler. And Freud, and that was of course the most interesting, and I'm being constantly asked about that little episode, you know, because they are really exploring every single second in his life. I remember that I arrived and I gave my visiting card to the maid. She said, Professor Freud is having lunch. She says, please announce me. And I was there in the salon, I was waiting, and I did see through a crack in the door, I saw the room with the D couch, the famous couch, a very small couch, tiny, with a Turkish carpet kind of flung over it. And pretty soon, Freud came out from the dining room with the napkin still around his neck, and he was kind of staring at that thing, and he says, are you Herr Wilder? And I said, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, you're with this and this newspaper? And he says, jawohl, Herr Professor. And he says, there's the door, and he threw me out because he loathed newspapermen.
I have the feeling, talking with people of your generation and coming from Vienna and of Jewish origin, that maybe because of the anti-Semitism, there was not a love story between you and your native city, that people of Vienna preferred Berlin. Am I right?
Well, it depends, you see. The younger ones, naturally, they preferred Berlin because that was the vibrant, modern city, especially the period where I lived there between 1927 and 1933. those were 1926. They were the 7 great years, you know, of Bert Brecht and of Schoenberg and of the Bauhaus, and things were happening.
In those days, life was tough in Berlin. To survive, were you doing only journalism?
Well, we were young, and jazz came up, and people started dancing the Charleston and God knows what. And I was one of those, and since I was kind of a fairly good dancer, and since times were tough, I did a stint as what you would now laughingly call a gigolo, kind of a dancer for money in a hotel, the Eden Hotel in Berlin. But actually, no, it was not quite as romantic as it sounds. Actually, I did it in order to write a series of articles on what it is to be a gigolo in Berlin, and it sort of made a bit of a scandal.
I heard that you wrote dozens of scripts in Berlin. The most famous was People on Sunday, a forerunner of neorealism.
Yeah, it was my first picture as a scenario, silent, mind you. One of the last of the silent pictures was 28, 29, and Robert Siodmak was the director. But it kind of gave me a foothold. I sort of started to become a professional scriptwriter, and I wrote many of the things there for UFA and other companies.
Did you feel already the lure of America in Berlin?
Naturally, everybody wanted to go to Hollywood, but it was the advent of Mr. Hitler that made us go into exile, which ultimately would lead many of us to Hollywood. When it became apparent that Hitler was going to take over, and what his politics are, and that it's going to be impossible for any of us to work, the exodus started. Some, afraid that they could not speak any other language but German, went to Prague, some went to Vienna, but they were just fooling themselves because Hitler followed them and took over those countries very quickly. I myself, I went to Paris, and I spent about a year there in Paris, made one picture with Daniel Darieux, who was very, very young then, called V.O.S.E. Gran.
Was it a comedy?
No, it was a serious picture, kind of cinema verité, as you call it, about young, kind of Vitelloni type kids who are stealing automobiles.
Then you went to the US to write scripts.
I went there and I never came back.
How did you manage to stay and work there?
You know, when you are a writer, when you are deprived of your language, you know, you're more or less you're dead. So I then just had to sit down and start studying English.